Afternoon all. We're going to get started. It's 4:30. My name is Michael Nelson, manager of the Cape Cod Gateway Airport, and welcome to the Cape Cod Gateway Airport PFAS status update meeting. Yes. Oh, sorry. Did everybody hear me? Awesome. Thank you. I'd like to take this moment to thank the airport's LSP, also known as Licensed Site Professional, HRP, Associate Principal and Regional Manager Brian Massa for all the work he and HRP have put into this multi-year effort and for the upcoming presentation. I would also like to thank the Town of Barnstable DPW Director Dan Santos and the Town of Barnstable LSP James Begley for their contributions to the ongoing efforts and support. And the Town of Barnstable, and the Barnstable County LSP, GZA, Geo Environmental, for their data sharing and collaboration. Additional thanks to the Airport Commission and the airport staff for supporting all the ongoing efforts, the Town of Barnstable for the great accommodations, the Town of Barnstable Communications personnel and Sarah Beal Fletcher for their support, and Pierce Cote Advertising for their support and assistance. Before handing this off to Brian, I would like to go over the format. This meeting is informational only and is being recorded. Cards and pens are provided for you to write down questions and submit. For people on Zoom, please type your questions. All questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. There is a hard stop at 6:30 p.m. due to a meeting in this room after this meeting. Lastly, I would like to announce that the airport is scheduled to receive a new aircraft rescue and firefighting vehicle within the next few days. This vehicle is the beginning of the airport's transition to firefighting foam that contains no PFAS. And with that, I'd like to hand this over to Brian Massa.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Brian Massa, licensed site professional of record for the airport. Appreciate the opportunity to present with you guys some new information. I don't know if anybody wants to come forward. There's a lot of graphics on here. I'm not sure if you guys can see them good from where you are, but if anybody wants to move forward, there's plenty of open seats. Otherwise, I think the way that the format will be is I'll present on the slides. I might stand up because the laser pointer won't show up to people that are watching on Zoom. So I'll get up and point on some things on the screen periodically. I'll probably take 2 breaks during the presentation. I'm going to try to keep the PowerPoint presentation to 45 minutes or so. I'll stop and take maybe a couple minutes worth of questions periodically throughout it. That way we can keep the flow going, get done, and leave plenty of time for questions at the end. All right, so with that, let's get going. All right, so for today's discussion, I'm going to touch on a couple things. First, some presentation terminology. That way we all kind of understand what we're talking about. The general PFAS investigation timeline that the airport has had. The joint sampling stuff that we've done with the county, Mike touched on this. We've been working a lot with GZA to do coordinated sampling. We've got 2 events so far that we've completed, one in May and one in December. I'll also talk about the work that we did in Yarmouth. I'll discuss those results. We installed a couple monitoring well clusters down there and did some surface water sampling. I'll also talk about the CAP and monitoring. I'll also talk about an investigation that was recently completed at the airport's rescue and firefighting building. And I'll also talk about what the next steps are. The airport is planning on doing some risk assessment work to develop risk-based standards for unregulated PFAS. I'll get into what that is in a minute with the terminology. And we're also doing some groundwater modeling. And at the very end, we'll have some questions. All right, so I'm going to get up and do some pointing here, I think, at this point. All right. So general stuff that we talk about, PFAS, I assume most people understand what that is, but those are polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're water, oil, stain, grease resistant. They're in consumer products, industrial applications. They're also in firefighting foam. So the PFAS that we're talking about for the airport is specific to its historic use of aqueous film forming foam that contain PFAS. That brings me to aqueous film forming foam. That's the fire suppression foam that the airport uses. Another term that you'll hear me talk about today is what's called a passive receiver. So a passive receiver is a site that doesn't make PFAS. It just, receives it. So for instance, We have consumer products that may have PFAS. We use those. Those goes down the drain, and then that ultimately makes its way to a wastewater plant. The wastewater plant receives that PFAS and then distributes it into groundwater. The wastewater plant didn't create the PFAS, but it was sent to them. So that would be an example of what would be called a passive receiver. We're also going to talk about a recirculated plume. What a recirculated plume is groundwater contamination that makes it to a drinking water supply and then gets transferred to people's septic systems and to wastewater plants by us using it every day. Analyte, so analyte is a term that means an individual PFAS. So we use EPA method 1633 for PFAS analysis, and it reports 40 individual PFAS. So when I say a PFAS analyte, I'm referring to one of those 40. There's thousands of PFAS, and 1633 only looks at 40 of those. I'm also going to talk about sucralose. So sucralose is a synthetic sweetener. It's like our Sweet and Low. So a way that you can track if something is being impacted by wastewater is to track sucralose. So if we see sucralose in our groundwater, that means that the groundwater is being impacted by septic systems and by wastewater plants. I'm also going to talk about well clusters. That's what these little guys are here. So when we review our data, we'll talk about well-clustered, nested wells, multi-screened wells, intermediate wells, shallow well, deep well. That's what these guys are right here. So when I talk about a shallow well, that would be this guy right here, number A. That's a well that's just bisecting the groundwater table. You can see you got a little plume here. So sometimes if there's a release, you'll see that release is only in the first couple feet of the groundwater. The groundwater underneath that is clean. But to figure that out, we put wells that are screened in multiple depths throughout the groundwater. So the second type of well, this well B here, that would be an intermediate well. That's deeper. And then a deep well is even deeper than that. So the reason that we use these is to figure out plume thicknesses, or if there's plumes that are stacked on each other, or even if there's commingled plumes. So in this depiction right here, you can see we've got a shallow plume. That could be anything, petroleum hydrocarbons, something else. We've got another plume that's going underneath it that could be a different type of contaminant. And even a third plume that's even deeper that's different than all three. We're also going to talk about down gradient. And down gradient means a property that's located hydraulically down gradient of a property. Does anybody have questions about terminology? All right. Another thing that I'm going to talk about is forensics. So environmental consultants use multiple tools and lines of evidence to determine the nature and extent of a release. A common tool involves creating fingerprints or chemical signatures to track a release in soil and groundwater. Fingerprint is created by plotting analytical data. Before plotting, the data is normalized, so the scale is percentage-based and not concentration-based. There are multiple ways to depict a fingerprint. My preference is a radar plot. The plot is divided into 9 different pieces. The fingerprints can be compared to others to determine if they're similar. So this looks like it's pretty simple. It's a circle, looks like a clock. What this has is all of these individual circles around it. Those are PFAS analytes. Those are the 40 PFAS analytes that are in 1633. This chart is broken down into quadrants. And these quadrants are the different classifications and different types of PFAS. So when we make a radar plot or a fingerprint, we take this data and we graph it. And the fingerprint that it generates is based on these individual PFAS analytes. So this particular profile you see right here, this is the airport's PFAS signature. This is a fluoropolymer-based foam. That's what the 6,2-STS means. And you can see it falls into fluoropolymer sulfonic acids. So what that tells me is this particular sample right here is associated with a fluoropolymer-based foam. and it's how we can track the airport's plume. The airport began investigating PFAS. The airport began investigating PFAS in 2016. From 2016 to 2025, the airport collected the following samples for PFAS analysis: 175 soil samples, 333 groundwater samples, 12 fire truck samples, 15 surface water samples, and the airport installed 2 caps in 2020. This is where the airport is as an investigation. So the airport currently is in phase 5, remedial operation status. So what that means is that the airport has delineated the nature and extent of its plume. We have an understanding of where it is, where it's going. We've passed through all of the regulatory timelines, and now we're just monitoring. We're monitoring to see if our conceptual site model changes over time, and we're also monitoring to make sure the caps that we installed are sufficient and working. So what this right here is, this documents the coordinated sampling event that I discussed we did with GZA, the first one back in May. So what you see right here is the airport's monitoring system. So all of these red circles that you see, those are monitoring well locations that are multi-screened wells. They're cluster groups. All of the ones that are in yellow are ones that we sampled. All the ones that are in green are surface water locations that we sampled. The county sampled multiple sampling locations that I'll show later up on its site as well as part of this effort. During this group, we did 45 groundwater samples, 6 surface water samples. We also did environmental forensics reviews on all of these to see if the signatures were the same or if they were different. This first grouping focused on what was going on in this area. So county is hydraulically up gradient, groundwater flows this way. Wastewater treatment plant also, groundwater kind of flows this way. Everything going down towards the Marwell. So this first round, we focused on this area. In round 2, which I'll talk about in December, we focused on this area. So this is the December sampling event. I'll keep this up for a second and switch by it, but you can see that basically we focused on the other area. So the reason that we did the sampling like this is we wanted to see what potential impacts could be coming from Barnstable Fire Training Academy through the airport to the Marwells, as well as the airport's plume moving towards Marwells. The second event was to see what, if anything, may be coming from the wastewater plant, cutting across the airport and then going down to Marwells as well. So what you see here is a bubble plot. This is like another tool that an environmental professional will use. I'll just get up and point it. So what this shows is this is all of the analytical data that was collected by the GZA and the airport in the May 2025 sampling event. You see there's a lot of points on here. The size of the point indicates if this is a shallow well, an intermediate well, or a deep well. And then the colors correspond to a concentration. So the reason that we do this is when we plot everything together, we can see different depths of plumes. I can see if there are shallow plumes, deep plumes, or intermediate plumes. So when I looked at this data, it became pretty clear that these yellows are intermediate and deep. There's a deep plume from here that's coming all the way, cutting through the airport, cutting through here, and going down to the Marwells. Same thing is happening over here. We'll fill in more data gaps, but there's also another plume coming this way, going down, going here, and continuing into Yarmouth. The unregulated PFAS analyte 6,2-fluorotomer is associated with the airport, and it was detected in Mill Creek at a maximum concentration of 233 parts per trillion. Hawaii set a drinking water standard of 1,500 parts per trillion for 6,2-fluorotomer. There's currently no Mass DEP regulatory standard for 6,2-fluorotomer, so this is one of the things that we'll be looking at when we do our risk-based standards. Hawaii regulates PFAS and PFOA at 4 parts per trillion, which is consistent with the federal MCLs. We're currently conducting a risk assessment to verify this unregulated analyte. PFAS 6 related to the airport and surface water is estimated to be less than the GW1 standard. All right. So this is kind of step one of when we get our analytical data. So we've broken this up into different areas. So first we'll look at the airport. So the airport has, as I showed you before, a very distinct PFAS signature. 6,2-fluorotomer, it looks like this. So if it's a clock, it's going down to the 6 o'clock hand. So this area right here is down gradient of the deployment area, which is the airport source, and we see that fingerprint. We see this fingerprint all over the place in the airport's plume area, which is within this boundary right here. It's also impacted Marwell 3. I'm not showing those on here because it gets really crowded, but when we look at it, we do look at every single location. We also see over here 6,2-fluorotomer, which again is representative of the airport, and we see this other kind of weird shape right here. We see it over here, we see it over here, and I'll get to why that's important. That shape is a recirculated plume. So what that is that's contaminated groundwater that made it to the drinking water supply wells, was circulated around town, was used, went back to the wastewater plant, and then started a secondary plume. The airport also used this water to make its aqueous firefighting foam solution. They used it on the airport as everybody else consumed it as well. What's that? So I show that 2015, there was almost 500 PPT in Mary Dunwell 2. And I think that's when PFAS treatment went in place. So this would have been prior to 2015. Anybody have any other questions? No? Yes. So what happens is when you have a release at the surface, right, you start with a shallow groundwater plume. So when we install a monitoring well, it's only a few feet into the groundwater table. And then what happens is that plume, as it moves away on Cape Cod, it drops like a foot for every 100 feet it travels. So as it moves away, it gets a little bit deeper and deeper and deeper. You can also have groundwater mounding, which if you have a surface release, this is what we're thinking happened at the county to push a deep plume. If you have a surface release and you mound groundwater on top of that, you push the contaminants deeper. So the reason that we do these clustered wells is we use it for forensically to track our plume. So when I look at the airport's plume, I'm trying to see, do I see it in the shallow, the intermediate, or the deep? So the airport's plume is pretty well defined. It's in the shallow aquifer, meaning it's 5 to 15 feet below grade. And then what happens is when it gets down towards Mar wells, it gets pulled deep because the cone of depression from the well is pulling it down, and then it gets that way. Once it gets deep or it's sitting on a confining layer, it tends to follow that layer, which is what's happening in the deep plume. So when we look forensically at the signatures, there's very distinct plumes out here. There's a shallow plume, which is the airport. There's an intermediate plume, and there's a deep plume. And the deep plume appears to be, and the intermediate, a mix of recirculation, people's septic systems, things that went to the wastewater plant, those passive receivers that I talked about earlier. So the deep plume that I was looking at that kind of starts up at the county site is over the GW1 standard. It cuts through the airport, and it goes towards Yarmouth, and I've seen it in HRP 101 and 102. So this right here is the forensic signatures that we see for the county. It's completely different than what you see for the airport. So you can see these are the signatures. The thing that's most important is PFAS and PFHXS. That's consistent with legacy firefighting foam. And you can see these signatures do not change as they migrate. So we have a signature up in the source area, signature as it approaches Mary Dunn, signature at the airport, signature as it cuts underneath the airport, and then all the way down into Yarmouth. This is a deep plume. This is, 50, 80, 100 feet below grade. The airport's plume is sitting on top of that. So this is underneath it. This recirculation, too, you'll see this fingerprint everywhere. And that's from what we assume to be the recirculation from the impacts to Mary Dunn wells. So Mary Dunn wells are pretty close. In 2015, they had almost 500 ppt of just PFAS. That water was circulated around town, went to the wastewater plant, went to people's septic systems, started a secondary plume over here. So this is the secondary plume forensic signature. So we have this other plume that's caused by the wastewater plant. The wastewater plant was a passive receiver. It received drinking water from residential use that contained PFAS. That PFAS was from consumer products, was from Mary Dunn, and also from the plume that gets way down to the Mar wells. So that started the secondary plume that goes this way. Now, I was trying to only keep with doing data from 2025, but I wanted to throw one from 2020 just to show that this is consistent. So again, you can see PFAS, PFHXS, PFAS, PFHXS, PFAS, PFHHS. And what this is, and there's other stuff in here too. So there's consumer products, there's other things that make it in there. But what's happening is there's a secondary signature that gets made and goes down this way. And again, we all use this water. This secondary contaminants were here prior to 2015. In 2015, treatment went on board. So the water started to clean itself up, but all of this impact was already here and will continue to be here until it flushes out. So here's kind of the sum of what we're seeing. We have a deep plume up here that's documented based on these bubble plots, the depth. There's a shallow plume that ends at Mary Dunn Pond. That's pretty clear in the data. But there is this deeper one that extends. Airport's plume, we modeled it, we've confirmed it with analytical data. It's sitting right here. What does happen though, and we modeled this too, is that the plume comes up when it gets past Mar wells and it goes into this wetland area. And in the wetland area, PFAS is being discharged associated with the airport. It's unregulated analytes, and when we look at what the concentration is, the concentration of sum of 6, which is the regulated standards, is less than DEP value. 6,2-fluorotelmer is in there. It's at about 230 parts per trillion, which is less than the 1,500 drinking water standard for Hawaii. But we don't have a drinking water standard or a surface water standard for that in Massachusetts. So we're looking to develop those risk-based standards. All right, so some takeaways from here. The highest, this is specific now to our CAP, the remediation system that we put in place. Oh. All right. So now I'm going to talk about the cap that we have in place. So in 2020, the airport capped its source. The reason that they cap the source is most of the PFAS that you see is from PFAS in soil migrating into groundwater, and it does that through infiltration. So if you cap a PFAS source, you stop the infiltration. But what does happen is whatever soil contamination is in the capillary fringe, which is the area right above groundwater, that will continue to flush out for years, 5 to 10 years. But what happens is nothing new gets added to it. So the airport's been monitoring the effect of this cap. The cap has had a 90% reduction in PFAS, sum of 6, since it was installed, and a 95% reduction in 6,2-fluorotolerance. So it's working. It's working quite well. So just some quick numbers here. So in 2020, this is before the cap went in place, PFAS 6 was at 1,170 parts per trillion. December 2025, so the last event that we did, it dropped down to 115. The highest pre-cap 6,2 fluorotolerant in the deployment area was 11,000 parts per trillion. And that was in 2020 as well. In December 2025, 540 parts per trillion. So the cap is working. This diagram is in all of our status reports. So this diagram shows how the cap is working. I'll try not to stand in front of it, but the red line that you see right there, that's when we installed the cap. You can see that PFAS concentrations were trending up because they were actively leaching, and we were picking that up. When we put the cap in, you see a very quick reduction in concentration. Then you kind of see these peaks and valleys. So what that is over time, the groundwater level goes up and it comes down. Every time it goes up and comes down, it leaches out what's in that capillary fringe zone. No new contamination is being added to it, but what can flush out is being flushed out. And every time it does that, there's a slight rebound and it gets less and less. So now you can see we're trailing down here. And that's where we started. So there's been a significant decrease. So the cap is working. All right. So RF SRE building. So that's the airport firefighting and rescue building. That's the location where the firefighters store their firefighting vehicles in the AFFF. About a year ago, there was a proposed project to do a floor drain improvement. And to do that, there was about 10 yards of soil that was needed to get removed. So prior to removal, we did some waste characterization. We identified PFAS in the soil. When we identified PFAS in the soil over the regulatory standard, we decided to do additional soil borings that weren't just targeting the area for excavation, but targeted the entire building footprint. So we installed 21 soil borings to 20 feet to delineate the vertical and horizontal extent of contamination. We did that. The contamination was focused to just the building foundation. The contamination did not make it to groundwater. But one thing that was very helpful in here was that the soil from in here never was in contact with the recirculation water. So it gave us a clear picture of what PFAS in soil would look like for this site. We have other sites where there's been ChemGuard releases of 6,2-fluorotolerant. It is 99, 98%. But this site is difficult because the airport did use the recirculated water. It was used all over the airport. It was used in the deployment area and other locations. So we have a mixed signal to start. When we looked at the soil data from this area, we saw that 98% of the total PFAS in the soil was related to 6,2-fluorotolerant, and less than 2% of it was related to PFAS 6. This correlates to other sites that we've worked on where there's been a ChemGuard release. It also correlates with the airport's purchase records. We identified that this particular PFAS release in soil didn't impact groundwater, and right now the building is servicing as a cap. We'll continue to monitor this area to make sure that it continues to not impact groundwater, and the building itself is acting as the cap. So next steps. We're working with the toxicologist to determine risk-based standards for unregulated analytes. So fluorotolerant, 6,2-fluorotolerant that's associated with the airport, there is no regulatory standard in Massachusetts for it. The only guidance value I've seen is the state of Hawaii has a drinking water standard of 1,500 parts per trillion. we're going to develop our own just to make sure that the concentration that we're seeing in Mill Creek, which is 233 parts per trillion, is not at a level of significant risk. We'd also would like to understand if the concentrations in groundwater are also at a level of no significant risk. We know based on our modeling, and we know based on a review of analytical data in the surface water, that the airport's PFAS plume, by the time it does get to the Mar wells, is less than the GW1 standard. And one of the ways that we figured this out, and just to confirm that our model was correct, was to look at the surface water data. So in our surface water samples, we have a location that's up gradient in Mill Creek to the airport's plume. It's surface water location number 1. The concentration of 6,2 fluorotomer in that sample was around 15 parts per trillion, relatively low. PFAS 6 was in the area of 100, I believe. Let me just check my number here. Yep, PFAS 6 was 133. So we look at that and we say, okay, there's an existing PFAS concentration 6 of 133, 6,2 fluorotomer is 15. We go to the next surface water sampling location. 6,2 fluorotomer was 233 nanograms per liter. PFAS 6 increased to 149, so it went up about 12 to 13, which is less than the GW1 standard, which is also what we modeled. So what we're trying to figure out in this risk assessment is what does the 6,2 fluorotomer aspect of it mean? We already know that there's a recirculation plume and there's impacts to Mill Creek that are associated with the recirculated plume, associated with others, and we're trying to figure out what do these detections mean for a surface water. The concentrations in groundwater are less than the GW3 standard, which is protective of surface water. So that is good. All right, I stayed pretty close to where I want, so we got plenty of time for questions. So I can go back through any of the slides and take whatever questions anybody has.
Hi, Brian.
Tom?
My name's Tom Camberari, and I work with the IANS PFAS group here in IANS, and very concerned about PFAS in the water and surface waters in town. It's a big issue. Just have a few questions.
Sure.
One, when distinguishing the shallow plumes and the deep plumes, if we look at the look at the data for, let's say, soil in the deployment area and the air rescue fire facility, and there's some pretty consistent detections of PFAS 6 compounds in the soil. I think like 50 of the soil samples taken in the shallow soil, 56% were detected PFAS 6, and 34 were above the S1 level, and that was for the deployment area.
Can I answer that question first? Why?
But let me just say that the air rescue station had something similar of the soil samples taken, 46% detected PFAS 6, and with 24% above the DP threshold. So we have PFAS 6 compounds above the levels in shallow soil at these sites. And also, if we look at your monitoring wells that are screened in the shallow zone, we also see these concentrations of PFAS 6 in the shallow zone. When I looked at when you look at the data over the period of time, the concentrations, let's say in the HW1S well, were as high as I think it was like 1,200 or something PFOs, and so the average of those wells was something around like 110 PFOs. So what we're seeing is when I look at your data, is I'm seeing PFAS 6 compounds in shallow soil, in shallow groundwater, and seeing it, and then we see it in those wells further down gradient going towards the Mar well, which is also telling us today about the recirculation sample situation, and that's not within, was not addressed in your phase 2 study. But how, what's your conceptual site model for these, for PFAS 6 in shallow groundwater, in the shallow soil, and in the downgrading monitoring wells from those sites?
I can discuss that. All right, let's start with the soil at the ARF building, because this is what I would like to show. So PFAS 6 is in AFFF as a contaminant, and it's low level. So when you look here, for instance, this sample right here, this is a soil sample, shallow soil sample from the ARF building. PFAS 6 is 1 to 3 parts per billion. It's in there, slightly over the regulatory standard as well. So the regulatory standards are individual PFAS samples when you get into soil. They range from 0.3 ppb up to 2. So we have PFAS 6 in soil from 1 to 3 parts per billion. It's in there, very low amount. 6,2 fluorotomer, 206 ppb. So a majority of the impact is 6,2 fluorotomer. There is a low level of PFAS 6 that's in there, and that's from the manufacturing process from contaminant. When we see it in groundwater, I have PFAS 6 right next to there, 2 parts per trillion. That's the drinking water standard is 20. 6,2 fluorotomer, 6 nanograms per liter. This location hasn't been heavily impacted by the firefighting building. This location over here is non-detect for both. So PFAS in the ARF building area isn't what's impacting it. What's impacting it is the use of water, recirculated water, in this area that had PFAS 6 at substantial concentrations. That's what it was. So Mary Dunn had 500 ppt of PFAS 6 in the groundwater. That water was used all over the airport. They mixed their firefighting foam with it. So you start to get these mixed signatures. That's what this is. This right here, it's 90-something percent 6,2 fluorotomer. This other thing that you see up here, that's recirculation water and impacts. Same thing you see down here. So again, this is the delineation that we did. The highest detection of PFAS 6, again, this is summed, which the regulatory standard is individual. Looks like it's 5 parts per billion. Over 200 for 6,2 fluorotomer and an impact. So again, this soil data tells us that 6,2 fluorotomer is the contaminant of concern.
This site that you're talking about here is what you sampled in 2025.
Excuse me?
If we look at the data,
They can't hear you on Zoom. Could you come up and...
So the reason this is very important, Tom, this area never received recirculation water. The PFAS that we see in the soil here is specific to the AFFF concentrate from the fire vehicles. It's concentrate. The deployment area was sprayed with water that was made from recirculation water. Firefighting foam is 3% AFFF, 97% water. We were using 97% water that had a PFAS 6 signature in it because it had been recirculated around town. That's why you see that in the deployment area.
so why are the concentrations that we see in shallow groundwater, like in the deployment area, over 1,000 in some cases, when you're saying that your recirculation water was at
500 ppt. Yeah. In 2015. The other thing is PFAS 6 attenuates the most to soil. So we were loading the soil with PFAS 6 in the water and allowing it to saturate in there. 6,2 fluorotomer moves much faster. So what we've done, this shows exactly what's happening. This is relatively flat because PFAS 6, they're long-chain PFAS analytes, they release much, much slower. You see the extreme response from 6,2 fluoropolymer because it's highly mobile. This right here made it down there from them using the water. So when they mixed the water, it had 500 ppt of of PFAS 6 already in it, substantially more than what they added from the AFFF.
Those concentrations that you're showing of the PFAS 6 are fairly high. Some of those peaks are like at 1,000, right?
It's because it holds it. So they hold to activated carbon, right, PFAS. So when it makes to the capillary fringe zone, they all have retardation rates. They all move out differently. Some move quicker than others. Some get held there, especially with the long chain stuff. They're held in that zone, and they accumulate, and they build up in concentration till they get to a partitioning coefficient that they will leach out. And then they leach out at a consistent concentration. So what's happening here is this concentration is staying relatively flat because there's no more PFAS 6 getting loaded to it. It's releasing at that low concentration.
I disagree. It's not flat. If you look at it, the scale of a lower scale, you're seeing concentrations.
Between 1 and 2, yes.
That would be microgram per liter. If you go,
so it's between 1,000 and 2,000.
It's 100 to.
But again,
like
we were starting with water that in 2015 had at least 500 ppt of only PFAS. We don't know the other contaminants in there, the other concentrations, and that was what was there in 2015. So the airport started using the deployment area in the mid-1990s. So from the mid-1990s, they were spraying the water that had that recirculation signature in there. They would spray it when they weren't using firefighting foam either. So they loaded up that area with that PFAS. That's what this is. That's why it's flat like that. It's not flat as in it's a low concentration. It's not significantly fluctuating because it's attenuating at the correct pace.
Right, and they're fairly high concentrations, above that 500 mark from the well that you're talking from the Marydon wells, and this is this site was used from 1994, right? So this 6,2 fluorotelmer is that. You're telling us that that's from the cumulative activity of the training at the deployment area for however many years that is, 30 years, and we're just seeing that now?
We tracked it. So there was a significant amount of investigation that went into this, Tom. So I'm presenting a little piece for the new data, but we tracked the trajectory of the plume. So the groundwater in this area is like 25 feet. There's 15 feet more soil for the PFAS to go through than up in this area. Also, PFAS entered Flint Rock Pond, so it had the ability to get in there much quicker. It took decades for the soil to make it down to groundwater. So when we started our investigation, it made it there. There was no 6,2 fluorotomer detections down here. It was all the background signature. We monitored it as it continued to move and continued to move and continued to move for a couple years until we saw it go to Marwell. So our conceptual site model was correct, and we modeled it that way too.
So you're saying that the decrease is totally due to the cap you put on, and it was the response was instantaneous almost. I mean,
6 months.
But we're seeing kind of rebounds below that.
Of course. Well, you expect a rebound.
Exactly.
So there's never been a rebound back up to where it was because there's no more PFAS above the saturated zone making it down in it to recharge it. So there's a zone like this thick. It's called the capillary fringe zone. Let's say it's 5 feet thick. Whatever PFAS is in there when you put a soil cap in there, that's what the concentration will be. If there's a PFAS above it, because we put a cap in place, groundwater won't infiltrate through and send the PFAS and soil deeper so that it continue to leach into groundwater. So PFAS has properties where it wants to be in a air-water interface, a pore space. So it's difficult to flush it out. It wants to be in that air-water interface. So what's happening is over time, as the groundwater goes up and down, it's flushing stuff out. The reason we see such a quick response with 6,2 fluorotolerance is it's the most mobile of them all. It's a short-chain PFAS analyte. So we expect to see the response that we see.
So if it goes so fast, the last training, as I understand, occurred in 2015. So you're seeing this high peak, right? And then let's say the other one occurred, 2012.
You're talking about a pulse.
Exactly. Wouldn't that have been a pulse in 2012, in 2009,
If a
2006?
If a pulse had occurred, we would have seen it in all of the other wells that were down gradient. So when we start, all of these monitoring wells down here are clustered nested wells. When we started our investigation, we sampled all of these wells. There was no 6,2 fluorotolerance detected in there. So what Tom's talking about is a pulse release where the stuff's stacked on top of each other. So you get some PFAS leaching out, you get some more PFAS leaching out, and you see it in pulses. When that happens, you'll see it other places. We don't see 6,2 fluorotolerance. What we saw is a consistent 6,2 fluorotolerance plume that doesn't break, that starts up here, goes here, comes down here, and goes to the wells. It's a solid plume now. It's not pulse. The concentration here is increasing. The reason it is because the concentration here is decreasing. So everything that's here, working its way down here. So this concentration has gone up over time because it's feeding it. And then it's going down this way and diluting and dispersing. The cap is working exactly as it's supposed to.
When you say flushing out, do we have any idea where it's all going? Are we thinking that it goes to Lewis Bay? Are we thinking that it goes to the ultimate source of fresh water? Do we have any idea?
We do. So through modeling and through analytical data, the area that you see right here, that's the extent of the airport's plume, this yellow boundary right here. So that's based on analytical data that we collect every 6 months that's been collected since 2016. It's based on groundwater modeling that was completed. By the time the plume gets to here, the concentration is less than the GW1 standard, which is the drinking water standard. When the plume is here, it's discharging into the surface water body. The PFAS 6 concentration that's there is less than the regulatory standard for drinking water, GW1. We're doing a risk assessment to evaluate if the 6,2 fluorotolerance that's there is a risk. That we don't know. What we do know is that the drinking water standard for 6,2 fluorotolerance in Hawaii is 1,500 parts per trillion, and we're at 230 parts per trillion. So we're still looking at that to see if that's an issue. But again, it's based on multiple lines of evidence. It's based on analytical testing that we continue to do. We keep seeing the same signatures. So these radar plots, we do those every sampling, and we've been doing it since 2015. So we document the signature, we document the concentration, we model it, we update our conceptual site model. Hasn't really changed. This has been our conceptual site model.
Christine Greeley. I had a question. You had some very elaborate and complex documents up on the screen. How are those available? Available for people to go online somewhere, or to somehow or other find these materials so they can look at them in greater detail? Thank you.
So I think a lot of this stuff is, the forensics aspect is periodically up on Mass DEP's website and our status reports. This presentation itself will get published. It may take a little bit of time, but the presentation will be up on the town's website as a Zoom call, so people can flip through it and look at the data. But again, a lot of this stuff was presented in our phase 2, where we laid out the forensics aspect, what the chemical signatures were, fate and transport. The chemical signatures haven't changed. The way that we're doing it hasn't changed. We've continued to monitor it. And we're seeing the same things that we saw in 2015, that before 2015, there wasn't drinking water treatment in place. So whatever discharges were occurring to Mary Dunn wells and to the Mar wells was getting recirculated. We don't know what the concentration was in any prior to 2015. That's when testing started. So the website right there is where the airport puts all of its PFAS reports. So I would give it a little bit of time, but this presentation will make its way up there.
Just to give you a little break, I want to ask our new airport manager. So what is the airport's official position on this recirculated plume, which supposedly, or I imagine, came through the water system, ended up in the wastewater treatment plant, and is now impacting significantly parts of West Hyannis. So we recently had tests done around Aunt Betty's Pond, and we've asked for the Mass DEP to evaluate that testing. So, presumably it crossed your property, but I'm reading between the lines, that you guys are not accepting responsibility for that particular plume. And could you state for the record what the airport's position is?
I would just a reminder, I'd like to have the questions written down if you can. And there's no official position. We're monitoring and we're analyzing, and now we're going to be developing the groundwater model and the risk-based survey or study of the existing issues that we have with PFAS. And so that this is a continuum, and it's a collaborative effort with the town of Barnstable and Barnstable County. Don't know why you would ask if there's an official position. We're doing our best to study it and hopefully mitigate it.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I've been following this since 2008, and I see a lot of testing being done. I don't see a lot of remediation being done. And so I'm curious to know, as you identify areas of high concentrations, why you don't have an approach. Would you pump it and clean it somehow? Should at some point, for example, in that one storage area or the one building, it doesn't sound like you even removed any dirt there. You're using the roof of the building as a cap. You've got another cap outside. Do you have a plan to either remediate or remove material from the airport?
With the groundwater modeling, we are developing a plan to see what needs to be done after the modeling. And if you want to add anything, Brian, to that.
Sure. Let me see here. All right. So, a couple things. For the secondary plume, the question was, is the airport not taking any responsibility for it? When you look at the forensic signatures, and I've been looking at these since 2015, you notice the one thing that these are all lacking in them, and that's the airport signature. The other thing that occurred too is the airport's plume made it to the Mar wells after treatment was in place. So the airport's plume wasn't circulated. So Mar wells sucked up the airport's plume and treated it with granulated activated carbon. And when that was reintroduced into the system, it didn't have 6,2-fluorotomer. So the Mar wells, I believe, went into operation with PFAS treatment in 2020. I believe it was 2020. We continued monitoring, and the airport's plume impacted this area in 2022. So there was already treatment in place. So from a risk perspective, the risk is being managed now, and the town compensated the town of Barnstable for treatment at Mary Dunn. So Mary Dunn well is acting as a remediation treatment system for its PFAS plume in this area. The surface, the soil cap that's in place is a way to manage the impacts. These impacts go down 20 feet. It's not feasible to remove it at an active airport. So the reason that we monitor the cap is to see if it's working, to make sure it's not torn and that it's doing what it's doing. And we expect the concentrations to keep dropping and dropping and dropping until there's very little coming out. And we have treatment here in place. And again, there's no receptor over here. There's no drinking water wells. The only drinking water supply system is down here, and it has treatment on place already, so drinking water is safe. Again, the Mary Dunn, just so I'll point these out to you, the Mary Dunn drinking water wells are right up here. These are very, very close to the county. So we know the first data point for PFAS from the Mary Dunn wells in 2015 was that 500 ppt for PFAS. So we know that water was entering the drinking water system at that time. We know that the airport was making AFFF and just spraying water every day. The airport makes sure the fire trucks work by spraying water every day. So, I mean, the airport was going to the deployment area and discharging the recirculation water there. You know, much more quantities than people would put into their septic systems was going in that area and mixed with the 6.2 fluorotomer. And as Mike said, the airport's doing groundwater modeling and will, determine if there's other remediations that need to occur.
Thank you. And
Hi, Anna Manatis. I'm not a hydrologist, I'm an internist. So my primary concern is exposure of patients or people in the area. Can you perhaps just outline what your exposure is, like for drinking water? What area is the Mary Dunn and the Maher well? Where is the demarcation line?
So fortunately, since 2015 for Mary Dunn wells and 2020 for Mar wells, treatment is in place and drinking water is not a concern. So currently.
We have to look at it from the point of view.
What's that? I am. So when you look at this recirculation plume isn't studied. It goes here and it's ending, and it continues likely to go down this way, but there's no data points. I think that the county is doing their conceptual site model. They're doing their investigation. If this recirculation that we're talking about is what occurred, then it would become something that the county would address or Mass DEP will address. But we've identified this as an issue during the airport's investigation, but it's not related to the airport.
Well, first of all, I want to applaud you for acknowledging there was a recirc issue. I mean, you took the lead on this, and we appreciate your efforts. We really do. The county, I don't believe, has even acknowledged that there was a recirc issue, right? I mean, has to your knowledge, has the county even said, yes, there was recirculation? Have they acknowledged it?
I don't believe so.
Right. And given that the county is not acknowledging the recirc, who is responsible for the remediation? Is it the wastewater treatment plant? Is it the DPW? Is it the town? You can't just ignore it, right? It's, again, you have done an absolutely fabulous job of identifying these issues. So help us, and I've said this before at past meetings, can you help us in some way convince the county, convince the DPW that they're underperforming?
I think that it's being reviewed now. I think that it's not being ignored. I think that, again, the county is in the middle of their investigation. There's, information. Again, the airport, this isn't new information. The airport has been saying this since 2018, actually. So since 2018, we've said this, and, appreciate that. It just seems like now it's starting to get looked into, especially when you look at what the concentrations were in 2015. 500 ppt is not a low level, and it's PFAS. And all of the background signatures that we see in this area are PFAS and PFHXS, which is a legacy firefighting foam. You know, that's pretty clear to me, you know, what that's from, but there's additional investigation that's going to occur. We just did a sampling event in December. The data just came in, we're reviewing it. I don't expect it to be any new data. We've seen these same signatures since we started sampling over there in 2018. The other piece of the puzzle that we put together was the sucralose testing that we just did. And the importance of it, and I probably didn't even touch on this, of the sucralose testing, is the sucralose testing shows that the wastewater plant is impacting the shallow groundwater, the intermediate groundwater, and the deep groundwater. So the particle tracking is going everywhere. It mounds up in that area, and it pushes groundwater deep. So the sucralose testing is helping us to show that the septic systems and the wastewater plants are a recirculation source. And the other thing to make it more complicated too is there are septic systems in this area, and people's consumer products also contain PFAS.
Good evening. It's Paul Rizal. I'm the Assets and Infrastructure Manager with Barnstable County, and there's been quite a bit of discussion here, and it's a very complex subject to get into, and I want the group to be aware that on March 10th at 6 p.m., we plan on holding our public information meeting, which will be discussing some of the information that Brian's covered, and then also information directly related to our site. Again, our meeting's going to go on for quite a while, so we hope to address some of the questions that this group has had, and we've been continuing to work with the airport, Barnstable DPW, DEP, all stakeholders involved. It's a very complicated site, and we'll update you accordingly then. And the link for the meeting can be found on our Barnstable County website. It's going to be remote, and that dates back to when we originally.
You can meet in person.
We had a project information or the PIP list, the public information plan, and they preferred, from what I understood, to meet remotely at a time. This was back. The stakeholders that were weighed in, they reached out to the county.
The voters would prefer you meet in public. Do we matter?
Yes.
Okay, can we meet in public?
For this meeting, I could have a conversation. We're already scheduling it, but we'll definitely take note of it. We have no aversion to meeting with the public group in person.
No, why don't you make it an in-person meeting? Do you have the authority to do that? Are you the chair?
I'll have a conversation with our.
The chair.
I'm not the chair.
Who is the chair?
Mark Forrest is the chair, county commissioner chair. I could have the conversation with them.
Talk
But
to Mark and tell him we're not happy. Okay?
sure, we'll do so. But the reason being we had the meetings remote is that it was more accessible to those, but we can acknowledge it.
You have to give the airport credit. They're coming here, taking the heat, okay? They're sitting here and talking to us, okay? County's not. Okay? So talk to the county, talk to Mark Forrest, tell him that COVID's over, in case you hadn't noticed, right? And that he can come out from the bushes now and come to town hall and meet with us. Is that okay?
Excuse me. I believe the question was answered, and you did commit to doing what you asked.
Do you want to do some of the written questions, and then we'll jump back to, okay.
Okay, since California generally has stricter PFAS monitoring and lower action levels for drinking water than Hawaii, why wasn't California standards used rather than Hawaii?
So I can answer that. So Hawaii actually has followed MCL, the EPA regulations. So California has their set of regulations. Hawaii, as far as I'm aware, is the only one that actually has a regulation for 6.2 fluorotomer that was calculated. And the reason, again, the airport's doing its own risk assessment because we're not going to rely on the work that Hawaii did. The reason that I'm throwing it out there is Hawaii didn't arbitrarily pick 1,500 parts per trillion. They're using the EPA MCLs for other contaminants, which are actually stricter than what Massachusetts is doing right now. We're summing for 20. They're individually regulating these at 4. The 1,500 parts per trillion was a risk-based value that they calculated for drinking water consumption. And the reason right now 6,2-fluorotomer isn't being regulated is because it's not as much of a concern as the regulated 6. So the regulated 6 have more health implications than 6,2-fluorotomer. But we want to make sure that's true. So again, we gave the Hawaii information out there just for a pointer so people can see that there's a value out there in Hawaii where they've said that it's safe to drink water with 6,2-fluorotomer at 1,500 parts per trillion. This isn't drinking water, and we're going to do our own risk assessment to see what the standard is. Is 1,500 the right number? Is 200 the right number? That's what we're doing. So we're going to come up with our own value. We're just putting it out there that we're aware that there's a number in Hawaii. This is what they're using. Massachusetts has no standard for this, which is why we've teamed with a risk assessor to develop a risk-based standard.
Thank you. And from Eric Schwab, have you tested Aunt Betty's pond for your fingerprint due to recirculated plume south of the plant?
So we have not. Let me pull up the surface water sampling map, actually. Or I'll start with this. So the airport's plume is going this direction, and the recirculation signatures don't show the airport's 6,2-fluorotomer signature that we would see in there. So the airport is focusing on this area heading down into Yarmouth. I've looked at the forensic signatures from, the ponds over here. I've looked at the airport's ponds. The airport's ponds don't have PFAS 6 in them. They don't have any exceedances, which is good, which is, expected because we know that they sprayed firefighting foam in the deployment area. The drainage systems on the airport do go to these 2 ponds, and again, we tested those. We didn't find an issue with them. But what the airport is focusing on now is what's going on over here, and that's the surface water testing that we've done. So let me bring up a slide that kind of zooms in on that area. All right. So this is what we've done so far, and again, we're still working. We just started doing this. So we've got 5 surface water sample locations that we put in across Mill Creek. This is like a cross gradient, slightly up gradient of where the airport's plume is discharging. So the airport's plume comes right in here and discharges to the wetland area. So this is what you'd consider up gradient. This is directly down gradient, which is why you see the highest detections of the 6,2-fluorotomer, and then it continues on. These Hayes Run and Town Brook, these also have PFAS detections. They've got PFAS 6. This is twice the drinking water standard. Again, it's not a drinking water standard. This is a surface water. This has no connection to the airport. There's no 6,2-fluorotomer, but again, it shows you that there's PFAS in the area. So we're monitoring what's coming into this area, what's mixing, and what's leaving. So surface water location number 4 is our last sampling point. We have 6,2-fluorotomer at 88. Again, that's less than what the drinking water standard is Hawaii, but we don't know what that means. The PFAS 6, though, that you're seeing here, the way that we kind of come up with the airport's not a significant contributor to the PFAS 6 is actually when you look at this sample right here, and again, we're still studying. We're going to do a risk assessment. We're going to model this. But you see PFAS 6, 133, 6,2-fluorotomer, 21. And you see the 6,2-fluorotomer jumps up to 233, and there's a tick up in PFAS 6 of like 15. So that all matches with what our modeling said, that by the time the airport's plume gets here, it's less than GW1. Unfortunately, there's no surface water standards. So what we've historically looked at is the concentration in groundwater, and we've compared that to what's called the GW3 standard.
Do you remember the values in the area around Aunt Betty's Pond? They were significantly higher, weren't they?
Yeah, they were about 200 something, 250 PFAS. Yeah, Aunt Betty's Pond was about 250 or something like that, and the creek also, but that's quite separate, I think, from this issue. It's in a kind of a different flow path.
I think it just, there's definitely a lot of stuff going on in the area. I know Tom did a study a few years back where he looked at all the ponds, and again, it shows that there's a lot of stuff going on here, and there's a lot of things that, there's recirculation that's going on. These are impacting drinking water systems, septic systems that are around any of these ponds that received. So, the wastewater plant receives a certain portion of town, but there's other areas in the town that aren't connected to that area that are on septic system. Those septic systems started their own secondary recirculation sources that impacted whatever surface water bodies or groundwater was near them. And then again, created a recirculation system that's going on. So there's a lot of study work that still needs to happen, but the airport is focusing on its portion because we're still figuring that out. We know for the groundwater aspect to it, we're less than the GW1, which is a risk-based standard. We know that there's treatment on married done wells. We know that there's surface water impact, but there's no surface water standards. There's the GW1, the GW3 standard that I was talking about, which is protective of surface water, and we're significantly less than that. Oh, I'm sorry, Marwells.
Okay, and from Zoom, what percentage of PFAS 6 is actually PFOA and PFAS?
I'm not sure I can answer that. So if it's talking about the regulatory standard, Mass DEP just has you sum the 6 of them together, and if it's less than 20, that's less than the risk-based standard. For forensic signatures, it depends where you are. If it's specific to the airport, it's minimal. It's a couple percent, and then it's 90% 6,2 fluoropolymer. For the county, it's different. They're very high in PFAS, PFAS and PFHXS. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but they're not, in Massachusetts, they're individually added together to create the 20.
Thank you. And what models are being used for your predictive analysis, and what data sets were those models trained on?
So the original modeling that was done used ModFlow. Right now, we're using GMS, which is a newer, more sophisticated model. It also uses that system as well. We've reached out to the town. We're getting all of the pumping records, all of the information for what the withdrawals were. We're looking at, I'll point it out on the map here, kind of what our focus area is. So we're basically looking, if you drew a line over here to the wastewater plant, we're focused here going down towards Yarmouth. There's also some of the municipal wells that are down here. We're also looking at those. So we just started this. This is going to take us 6-8 months. This is a big undertaking. We've already received all of the historic analytical data for the drinking water wells from the DPW. So we have we're going to primarily look at what the raw water intake testing was. So we're going to look at those values. We've received that data. We're going to tabulate it. We'll do forensics on it. We're going to develop our model based on pumping rates. PFAS is tricky, and we've been doing this for a while, and a groundwater model is great, but it's not the only tool to use. So we look at multiple different tools. Groundwater models, you can't get them perfect. You can run them in transient or steady state, and one is you pump all the wells all the time, or you pump it based on the records that we have, but it's never that cut and dry. Same thing with particle tracks. So we're kind of going to use a collaborative approach. It's one of multiple lines of evidence that we're going to look at. We're going to develop a groundwater model. We're going to look at the environmental forensics. We're going to look at the analytical data, and then we'll see what others have done. Like I said, the first model that we did was a ModFlow developed by USGS. We did particle tracking. We modeled based on transient steady state. We did a 30-year discharge using the highest concentration that we had, and we continued to hit the groundwater with that concentration for 30 years and looked and simulated what it would do. We verified with analytical data. So when we go out and test, we're seeing that what the model predicted, I don't have the figure in here, but in our phase 3 report, it shows basically the outline of the plume, this. We test that with the analytical data and we model it, and then we're even seeing it in the surface water. We knew, and our model shows it, and it's in our phase 3 report, that it discharges to the creek. At the time when we wrote the report, there is no surface water standard, there still isn't, and we were less than the standard GW3 that's protective of surface water. So now we're moving along and we're looking more into this, and we're continuing to build our conceptual site model, which still hasn't changed. And we're collecting the data to make sure it was correct, and it's still correct. And now we're going to use some more new advanced modeling technology that's available just to double check it again.
Thank you again. And I'll answer this one. When will the airport cease all use of PFAS firefighting foam? So my goal is by the end of the fiscal year 27, which is June 30th, 2027, a little under a year and a half from now. If we can do that sooner, that's going to be what we're going to do. Thank you.
I'll just add on to that the airport actually extensively tested the fluorine-free foam just to make sure that it didn't contain PFAS. So the airport obtained, the military has approved 4 different types of foam that it considers fluorine-free. The airport tested all foams using total oxidizable precursor analysis, also total organic fluorine. One foam did have a detection. They obviously aren't going to be going with that foam. 2 other foams had no detection. They're also certified foams. So again, the airport has gone through extensive testing to make sure that the fluorine-free foam is in fact fluorine-free.
Thank you for the presentation tonight. Last June, Brian, you indicated in response to concerns from the community that you would look into the technology that the county is installing or has installed at its site, and that's permeable reactive barrier technology. And so I was wondering if you could give a status report on your investigation.
Yes. So we're actually currently running a pilot using a different material. So correct me if I'm wrong. I think the county used colloidal carbon, which is like a nanoscale carbon. We, for various reasons, ruled out that for this particular site. But there's been a new PRB material that was actually just patented. We're doing the first ever use on it in Truro at another PFAS site. It's a combination of granular activated carbon, so it's not a nanocarbon, but it also includes ion exchange media. The benefit to it is that ion exchange media traps PFAS in it. Carbon can let the PFAS go if it's overwhelmed. The ion exchange media is designed to hold PFAS, so the carbon is only a sequester to slow things down so it can bind the ion exchange media. We just finished a pilot in Truro. We're actually ramping up to do a full-scale PRB there. So the airport is carefully watching that to see. The process has gone very well with the pilot. We saw a substantial 75% reduction in 30 days. For the small pilot, we expect that it'll continue to go that way. So we're evaluating things. Right now, where things stand is the cap is working, and the risk is managed by the drinking water supply wells. So again, there's pros and cons with doing PRB work. So we're going to see how it plays out in Truro. But the airport has indicated that if a PRB is necessary, then that's something that they'll look into. And I think that was discussed in our last joint call that we did with the county. What was that, a few months back in June, I think, that they had committed to do that.
I have a question. You just said if the airport determines the PRB is necessary. How do they determine that? What gives them the authority to determine that? What data will inform that decision?
So what we're looking at, if we were going to install a PRB, it would be down gradient of the cap. We can't, when you move far, so kind of like what the county did. So a PRB, they're injecting it around your source area, and it controls the further leaching. So if we inject it right up here, right, everything that's already in place is going to continue to leach. It's already there. The only way to control what's in here is if we did a PRB injection, right at the end of where our contaminants were. And that, for many reasons, isn't a good idea. So if the airport was to do a PRB, it would be inside of our cap area. And there may not be a reason to do that. The concentrations now from the December have dropped so low that in the next year or two, it might not be an issue. So to put a PRB in would be, something that if the cap wasn't working, wasn't doing what it was doing, or there was a risk, drinking water supply or something that wasn't being managed. But if they did put a PRB in place here, all of this contamination stays. It's still going to leach out. So PRB is great for source control, but that's what it is. Once you install it, just like the cap, everything that's down gradient still is going to get flushed out. You'll have clean groundwater that's leaving the PRB. Just like now with the cap, every time that there's a flush cycle, the groundwater is cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. So that's why we're still evaluating it. We're going to look at the risk-based model that we do. Is 6,2 fluorotomer an issue? And we're going to look at those things to see if it makes sense for the next steps.
So are you saying it's not possible to install it further downstream to catch that before it continues to go into Mill Creek?
There's a couple reasons why. So the first one is you have the drinking water supply wells there. So to install a PRB in proximity, there's the potential that the cone of depression from the wells itself could pull the PRB media out, which would be very bad. So originally that was one of our concerns with injecting the colloidal carbon so close to the drinking water supply wells, is that the colloidal carbon can move. This material is still more coarse, but when you put in a production rate of what you see down at the Mar wells, there would be a concern that it could pull it out and damage the drinking water system. So that was originally the first reason we didn't look at it. The second reason is when you move off airport property, it becomes private property. So we could potentially put it into a right-of-way, but where you would want to put it is all private. So like this area down here, where you have kind of like the highest concentrations, because now, this isn't leaving anymore. So you have the highest concentrations that were up here, that 15 parts per trillion when we capped it, has moved down here, because that's how a cap works. We stopped it, but there was already stuff that was in the ground, and now it's moving, but it's being diluted as time goes on. But if this whole area right here, this entire park is all private property. So we wouldn't be able to get access to install a PRB in there. And again, if we install the PRB here, the airport's plume is shallow, and there's treatment already occurring at Mar Wells. So it's kind of like, why would you do that? Because there's already treatment occurring here that that the airport compensated the town for. So the combination cap and drinking water well treatment is the current chosen remedial strategy, just because there's issues with the PRB. It's not off the table. It's still being looked at. But if a PRB was installed, it would be on airport property.
Okay, I have two more questions. One, you just talked about the compensation. How long will that compensation go? What do you foresee? And how do you determine the amount of compensation you give to the town? Because we are continuing, the preponderance of your cleanup is happening at our wells in the town of Barnstable. So how do you continue to determine the amount that you give to the town? And the other question I had was, you mentioned, Manager Nelson, that you're going to get rid of the PFAS foam at the end of the fiscal year. Why hasn't that already been gotten rid of? That seems curious that we're still hanging on to that. And as a piece of that, there was a fire recently at Provincetown with an aircraft. Do you know if Provincetown is using foam that is also contaminated?
I'm unable to speak to anything at Provincetown. I just know about Cape Cod Gateway Airport. And right now, we have just started the process of the transition with this new vehicle. And as you know, I've only been at the airport about 9 months. And so the effort to transition to the PFAS-free foam has been underway for a couple months now. Extensive testing, extensive monetary commitments to do this. And there's also now, to transition, we have vehicles that have foam that contains PFAS, and we have to dispose of that responsibly and safely, which is also another long process, and it costs another large monetary commitment that we haven't been appropriated for yet. So that's why we're pointing to fiscal year 27 to get this done.
So only you initiated this?
I can't speak for previous management.
But you just said we've only been at this for 2 months or so. You initiated.
2 months or so.
The question was, you initiated moving away from the foam.
Well, with help from the staff, talking to the staff, and Brian.
Okay.
So to touch on that too, to use the new fluorine-free foam, all firefighting apparatus needs to be replaced. It can't be used in the same vehicle. So they have to be very careful how the transition occurs, because it's not as simple as get rid of this foam and spray the new foam, because it doesn't work. You need to put in these new pumps and new hoses, training, because it doesn't blanket the same way. So that's why it can't happen tomorrow too, that there's a process to it, but they are in the process of it.
What about the financial? How do you continue to calculate that?
So and Dan Santos maybe wants, I don't know, Dan, do you want to discuss this, or I can give kind of the high level. The calculations were done to determine what proportion would be airport-related responsibility, and it was agreed to by all parties, and compensation was given. So again, the airport did this because we knew that we were relying on a treatment system to treat a portion of its plume, and there's costs associated with operating that treatment system. So we projected out how many years it would take, what the timeline would be, costs for infrastructure, what those would be, and the airport compensated.
And an online question on Zoom. Aside from the PFAS firefighting foam, are there any other sources of PFAS currently used at the airport?
I think that the quick answer to that is no. Consumer products, again, consumer products have PFAS in it. They've been transitioned out. But now what's located on the airport, the firefighting foam is the PFAS source.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, we do not test the firefighting foam any longer. It's not dispersed on the airport. The only reason we would use that is if we had a aircraft that required the foam to be suppress the fire, and that's about it, to save lives.
So one of the things, and I'll just touch upon, I didn't even discuss it in the presentation, is in 2015, once the airport realized that PFAS was an issue, the airport stopped the mandated FAA testing. So the firefighting foam deployment that occurred annually and that occurred during triannual drills was an FAA requirement. So the airport every year would go and spray, starting in the mid-1990s, they would spray firefighting foam in the deployment area once a year to show the fire trucks worked, and then they would spray it every 3 years during an MCI, mass casualty incident. In 2015, when all of the PFAS testing occurred and it was detected in the drinking water supply system, the airport said, we're not spraying it anymore. The airport stopped doing that in 2015, and they purchased an ecological cart. And what the ecological cart does is it's a piece of equipment, again, airport, first in Massachusetts, and I might have even been one of the first in the country, that took this piece of equipment and it can verify that the proportioning valves on the apparatus work. The reason that they would spray the foam is if there's an emergency, you want to make sure that the equipment works and that life-saving is paramount. So that's why they would spray the foam, and it was an FAA requirement. But this new piece of equipment which had not at the time been approved by FAA, but was used because the airport understood the environmental implications of using AFFF, allowed them to say our equipment works, we know that it'll work if we need to use it, and now it's only used in the event of an emergency for life-saving. The other thing too is the airport maintains an on-call environmental contract, so if there was an accident and there was usage of AFFF, the cleanup would start immediately. So we would have time to remediate it, to remove it from soil, so we don't have ongoing groundwater issues. Back when the firefighting foam was used, nobody knew it was an issue, so nobody was going and excavating it out. It's just it would get sprayed and left there. Now we know it's an issue, and there's an on-call contract in place for if there's an emergency and it's used, it would be cleaned up.
Okay, and online, would PFAS mitigation be more effective and less expensive if the airport were to close?
That's not even an appropriate question. It has nothing to do with it. So again, the airport has taken responsibility for the cleanup. It is doing the cleanup, and it is doing everything it can to be environmentally and fiscally responsible, and switching to the fluorine-free foam and trying to clean up its releases of AFFF. I guess I can leave it at that.
Can I ask a question now? Betty, in response to your question about what the contribution was, I think the records show that the airport contributed something like $460,000 to the town for its contamination in total. And so I think that's like 4% of the total cost of that treatment plant. But I just want to, because I'm still, Brian and I have been having this conversation for as long as it goes about the contamination at the site. Is it just total, the 6,2 fluorotelmer? Is there no, source for the legacy PFAS 6 on the site? And the model that was being presented, Brian's presenting, is there's a source of the PFAS 6, and that's the county and this recirculated water that's come from, like, say, the Mary Dunn wells. So I just want to make two things. One is research over at Joint Base Cape Cod by the USGS has indicated that these PFAS sites will release PFAS for centuries. And that was like the title of the paper, a century-long sources of PFAS. So we got, these are forever compounds, and so that's kind of what they're doing. So I'm not sure whether we're really going to see, from the performance monitoring, everything kind of dissipate and dilute over, a short period of time. The other thing is that your timeline for PFAS release at the site and the ChemGuard source of the fluorotelmer is, being at that as the exclusive source. That's the exclusive compound that you used, was the 6,2 fluorotelmer. It kind of begins in like 1996 or 94 with the deployment area and the triannual drills. But we know this airport has been around for decades before that. And if sources, earlier activities of fire training and that had occurred at the site, decade before your timeline begins, or 2 decades or 3 decades, these would likely still be sources out there. And so when we look at these maps that the airport and the county had put together, and you identify these unidentified plumes coursing through the middle of the airport, we're kind of saying, well, what were the sources of that? And we would be, we look, and I think your report has looked at the former Air Force, the Air Rescue Training Facility that has been kind of abandoned and, and put into the ground, and then also this 1991 training area. And there was not much investigation in that. I mean, did soil samples in that, but we've never seen like wells put in there. And I know you have one well south of the former facility, air facility, and I think your 2025 readings of that is like, it's over 100 PFOS in those HWX well, both shallow and deep. So we kind of like, why haven't you looked to see and identify that? I think it would help us greatly understand, this mix of sources and all that when you're looking at the wastewater plant or septic systems. We still have shallow PFOS underneath, at the airport that's still showing up.
So let me start addressing, because
it's a long question.
We get 25 minutes, and it'll probably take me 25 minutes to answer Tom's question. So
took me that long to ask it.
So the benefit that I have from everybody else is I am so in the weeds on this site that I've evaluated these things 20 different ways, and I'm not a great speaker, so I probably myself I know, but I can't, it doesn't come out maybe that way. So I'll try to answer Tom's questions. So we were very systematic in developing our conceptual site model. We didn't just start sampling and doing stuff. So first, we looked at the airport purchase records. The airport has purchase records going back to the mid-1990s saying they purchased fluoropolymer-based foam. We got the records. They're in our Phase 2 report. So that's our first line of evidence. Okay, we know we had a fluoropolymer-based foam. But Tom brings up, well, that was in 1992. The airport's been there since the 40s. What happened before that? Firefighting foam was invented in the 1960s.
I think your records only go back to 2000.
2000,
yeah.
Okay. So 2000, we have receipts, purchase records that show that fluoropolymer-based foam. So there's a gap there. So first, we talked to airport fire staff. The airport fire staff, Bob Holdeman, has been here since 1980. So we interviewed him, and he said that the airport wasn't a certificated airport prior to 1992 or 1993, in that there was no need for them to have AFFF because it was a municipal airport. It was budgeted. They didn't have it, didn't use it. Okay. Their old firehouse, we put soil borings in there. We didn't find any PFAS detections, none. No PFAS 6, nothing. The other thing that's important here too is surface water. So the entire airport, all of the surface water from the airport drains into these two ponds. Like Tom said, PFAS is a forever chemical. If PFAS from firefighting done over here or done over there or done over there, make it into the catch basin system that would have made it into these two ponds, there's 0 6,2 fluoropolymer, no PFAS 6 detections in these ponds. So what that tells us is that the firefighter from 1980 said, well, we didn't use it because it was expensive. We didn't have a need to, just didn't have it. 1990s, certificate airport, they need to have it. They had their old firefighting building. It was somewhere over here, right? We see HWX and M. So we collected soil samples from there. PFAS isn't in the soil. PFAS is in groundwater. Again, there's a huge plume recirculating that's coming through this area that has impacts shallow, moderate, and deep. So again, we need to go back and look at the forensic signatures for it. So we have purchase records saying fluoropolymer-based foam. Firefighters said, as far as I remember, we always used fluoropolymer-based foam. It was always ChemGuard. When you look at, there's a ITRC, and they're kind of like the go-to for PFAS. They have a table in there that says when these foams were invented. ChemGuard, which is the brand that the airport uses, fluoropolymer-based foam was available in the 1990s, early 1990s. So again, the firefighters say, well, that's the foam that we always used. That's the signature that we see. The accident site that Tom's talking about is right here. And I know what Tom's getting at. He's getting at a 6.2 fluorothalonil detection at this well that's over here. So we did soil borings over here. We didn't find PFAS in the soil. During the course of the investigation, 6.2 fluorothalonil is detected off airport property up over in this area in the shallow groundwater, indicating that it's from a source that's close by. This area is cross gradient. If there was firefighting foam sprayed over here, it's going to go like this. It's not going to go over there. This area that you see up here has an industrial history and has a metal plating history. 6.2 fluorothalonil is the common mist suppressant that's used in electroplating and for that. So again, there's a detection of 6.2 fluorothalonil over here. I think Tom's trying to say that the airport is the source of that 6.2 fluorothalonil. We believe that it's a detection related to a separate release somewhere in this area that has nothing to do with the airport. And again, soil borings that we've done over here, no PFAS 6, no exceedances, hasn't been detected in the surface water bodies. Firefighters told us all the work that they've done has been in the deployment area. We put soil borings up and down this runway. They don't show them on this map, but we've got 30 borings up and down the runway. They don't exceed for regulatory standards. Again, it goes back to the staff said that they focused in this area. We delineated in this area. That's where we see the impacts. And then over here, there was a little grass area outside of where they park their rescue vehicles, and there's a fire hydrant right there. So to test their apparatus, they would put water into there, which is why we have the detections. And we also suspect that there was a incidental discharge inside the building, which had floor drains that collected to that area that we closed. This area is capped. We're monitoring it. The concentrations are not anywhere near what we see over here, which is why we tend to focus on the deployment area as being the significant source, where this appears to more be like a one-time, maybe some incidental stuff that made it into floor drains that went into that area over there. But again, we've evaluated multiple lines of evidence to kind of look at all these different scenarios. And they're checking the box as we go. If they did use a legacy type of foam, we would expect to see that signature in the soil, and we don't. When we see PFAS impacts, we see fluorothalonil-based impacts.
There was some detections of PFAS 6 in one of the borings there in the 1991 site.
Yes.
So, to really answer the question, I guess whereas is, instead of lines of evidence where you have a suspected site where it was used, why not throw a well in there and put it to bed? I mean,
there are wells up there.
Not in the 1991 area, and you only have one well at the former station, which, as I said, has PFAS in the shallow groundwater, over 100.
The cost to put monitoring well clusters in is substantial, and if there was a reason to put it in, we would put it in. But the conceptual site model shows that this isn't an issue. This is a gut feeling that Tom seems to have, that the airport has to have done this. They had to have done it. They had to have used it. All of the analytical data points otherwise. I'm not saying that PFAS 6 isn't in the airport's firefighting foam. The soil samples that I showed you have 98% 6.2 fluorothalonil, and they have 2% PFAS 6. So PFAS 6 is in there. It's not at a legacy foam concentration. When you see a legacy foam, it's 90% of PFAS, PFHXS, PFAS 6. Total opposite of what the airport is. So going back to 2018 when we had these discussions, I said that the airport never said, and I'm not saying that PFAS 6 isn't associated with the airport. We use 6.2 fluorothalonil because it's an easy way to look at the data and distinguish it and say, this is the airport, this is a commingled source, or it's not. Again, the PFAS 6, and this is well documented, is a contaminant that happens during the manufacturing process of fluorothalonil-based foams. So to see it, it makes sense. Now, the reason that there's high concentrations in the deployment areas, you have to understand that the airport was using recirculated water. 97% of the water that the airport sprayed in the deployment area had at least PFAS in 2015 at 500 ppt. So they were using that as their base water to make their firefighting foam. So they took something that already had super high concentrations of PFAS 6, and they added their 6,2 fluorotelmer to it. And then they used that water, and they recirculated that water too and started a secondary plume. So the reason you see that is because the source area there was created from using recirculated water. And the way that we document that is by looking at soil samples that weren't touched by that. So I've worked on other PFAS sites where we have 6,2 we don't have commingled plumes. We have sites where it was ChemGuard, fluorotelmer-based foam, and the fluorotelmer-based foam signature looks exactly like what we saw under the ARF building. And that's because it wasn't adulterated, it wasn't mixed with something else. So again, all of the pieces kind of move towards, yes, there's PFAS 6 in there. There is. It's predominantly 6,2 fluorotelmer. It's over 90%. So when we see these high levels of PFAS and PFHXS and you're missing 6,2 fluorotelmer, it's not the airports. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, over 1,000 at the deployment area. And so if you only had 500 coming in, how do you get 1,000?
Again, so imagine the soil acts like a sponge. And that 1,000 is in 2015. Tom knows that there's concentrations that are up at the county that are orders of magnitude above that. So the one time that a sample was there in 2015, I think they had actually stopped doing training out there by then anyway. I forget what the date was. But that was when training had stopped. So this was probably the lowest concentration that would have been detected there anyway. But there's 40 years of discharge there that could have occurred with various types of concentration. And the deployment area acted as a sponge. So the soil was getting loaded with this. PFAS 6, and again, all of the data shows this. PFAS 6, long-chain PFAS analytes, will stay in soil. They want to be at an air-water interface. They stay in that area. They build up to a concentration, and then they partition out at a consistent rate, and that's exactly what the CAP data shows us that they're doing. 15 more minutes, so probably one or two more questions.
So I want to clarify. So you're saying that the airport is responsible for the contamination at the Mary Dunn well and the Maher?
Marwell.
Well, okay. So that's knowing now that the water commingles with the rest of the wells in the area. We're talking 7,000 plus business and households were affected. You mentioned Forever Chemicals. I would say there's some degradation we're finding over about 8 to 10 years. But I'm part of the Mass Medical Society. I sit on the Board of Trustees, and I'm also one of the sponsors of a resolution to get testing, state testing for exposed residents. So would the airport support that for us if we go forth? Because I think really for all of us, this is the beginning. This is like the asbestos of our age, of the 2020s. And I really, you need to see the beginning. The effects are not going to be seen immediately. They're going to be seen down the line.
So I think from a risk-based standard, what the work that the airport has done has shown that the airport's PFAS plume impacted the drinking water after treatment was in place. That's extremely important. So when the airport's PFAS plume impacted the Mar wells, they were already treating it. So people weren't exposed to PFAS-contaminated groundwater from the airport. The airport's PFAS plume hit the Mar wells in 2022.
Exactly, but the time before that.
So there was treatment in place already. So treatment at the Mar wells started in 2020. Right. So the airport's plume impacted those wells 2 years after treatment was in place. So the impacts that people are seeing are not related to the airport. So the recirculation plume and all of these other plumes predate when the airport impacted the drinking water supply. That impact had already occurred. So going back, the Mary Dunn wells were likely impacted first. These are these guys. It's hard to say. I mean, the county The county started operation in the 50s. PFAS became a firefighting foam in the 60s. They didn't test until 2015. So it gave it 55 years to make it. I think that, Tom probably agrees, groundwater moves about a foot a day. So every year, the groundwater moves 300 feet. So in 5 to 10 years, I would assume that well was probably impacted.
So, but you have to look at it from the point of view that people were drinking the water, and it contaminated.
I agree.
So you look at the timeline, the disease doesn't come until way after, but the testing of individuals is important, so you have a way to track it. So that's one of the things. And you can get the specifics of those 2 town wells and actually analyze if you're looking what percentage of the annual production comes from each of them, if the engineers in the town can help us. So I'm looking towards you because I have 2 other meetings coming up specifically on this, on testing patients so that we can track them with state testing, really, because sometimes now insurance pays intermittently. Thank you.
Take a couple of the written ones to see.
And from Zoom, if I grow vegetables in my yard where there is contaminated soil, will I be consuming PFAS when I eat those vegetables?
So I am not a risk assessor, which is why we've hired, which is why we've brought one to the team. That would be a specific question for a risk assessor for what type of uptake leafy vegetables or other things would have. And it's not a simple yes or no answer. Sorry for that one.
No worries. The last question online, doesn't the hydraulic fluid found in some airplanes contain PFAS?
So PFAS was phased out, PFAS was phased out in 2002. I think the short answer is yes, it could be in there. PFAS was in all sorts of products. Again, leave it at that. There's PFAS in all of our consumer products as well. So the possibility of it being in there, yes.
And just a note on that, the airport machinery uses environmentally friendly hydraulic fluid.
Probably time for one more question, and I think that's probably it. Tom, we have 6 minutes before we have to get out of here.
Well, it'll take me like 4 to get it out. But, so, Brian, it's just kind of a process question. You've gone through phase 5. You got the performance monitoring at the CAP. You're required to submit those as reports, and you guess you're doing annual reports. You've with the cooperation with the airport, have kind of committed to doing annual meetings. But all this work and all that, will it totally be out of the MCP DEP review?
No, of course it's not.
Okay, so how does that work? Because a lot of us are on the PIP team, and
sure.
So this kind of would have seemed like an appropriate PIP meeting with notice and all that. So I'm not sure.
So the airport is out of the PIP requirement because it's in phase 5 remedial operation status. So we're not doing milestone reports. So the airport said that every year we will do a public meeting. Everybody would have an opportunity as a PIP site to look at milestone reports and discuss them. So the risk assessment work, all of these other things, the airport has already passed through phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, which the public had a chance to comment on. The work that we're doing now, we don't expect it to change the findings that we've already done. We're doing this more of a way to just continue to show that the airport is following the most recent scientific trends that there are. So there's more advanced groundwater modeling that was available when we did our model, 8 years ago. So we're looking at that. there was no risk-based standards. We had PFAS 6, and there was not really any guidance on what to do about the regular ones. The airport immediately started looking at total PFAS. I don't know if you guys have probably come to multiple meetings. For years, I talked about total PFAS, and it probably confused everybody. And the reason that we did that is we understand that Massachusetts has regulated 6, and the standards may change in the future. So we are continuously looking to see, is there something that we're missing? And if we missed something, then maybe we need to go back and update. But for now, everything that we've done has always fallen back to further support the work that we've already done. So the model that we're doing, it's going to be submitted to DEP. It'll be submitted as a status report. It'll be discussed with GZA and with others, and Tom, you'll be on those meetings. So it's not going to be done in the blind, and we're going to hold status meetings every year, and we'll show it to the group. But from a formal PIP perspective, it's only required if we go back into a phased report. And right now, we don't expect there to be any significant change. We think that we're going to do the modeling, and the modeling is going to support and agree with what we've already said. We're hoping, actually, it will help others to understand what's going on regionally, which is why the airport's doing it. When you saw what I pointed out, we're not just focusing on what's down gradient of the airport. We're looking at what's down gradient of the wastewater plant to help people understand where did this go. So we're obviously going to share that information with others, but we don't think it's going to change anything for the airport's plume. Same thing for the risk assessment. We know that we're already less than the GW1 standard, which is the regulatory standard in Massachusetts. Again, that's why we're in phase 5. So by the time that it's migrated to a receptor, it's at or below GW1, there's already treatment in place, there's no risk. There's a surface water impact, and when we did the initial work, you would compare groundwater to GW3 standard, and we're less than the GW3 standard, so there was no reason to go any further. But now the airport is working with a risk assessor to, again, verify that these detections of 6,2-fluorotelmer aren't a concern. So again, it all goes back to what our initial conceptual site model is, which is what I presented earlier. And over the last 6 or 7 years, we continue to check ourselves and make sure that it still sticks. We always look at the historic data. We look at the new trends to see if there's any changes and update our conceptual site model, but we really haven't seen any significant changes in data. It's still kind of what we always thought. It's just there's more work being done at the county, so it gives us a larger data set and more people to discuss it with.
Until you put the well in the 1991 site.
What's that?
Until you put the well in at the 1991 site.
So we put the well in, and I don't think it's going to tell us any additional data. So we just did a very large sampling event in December to look at all of the stuff that's outside. That information, if it points to us needing to put a well there, Tom, we'll put a well there. Just like we did in Yarmouth. I have 2 minutes. So we put those 2 monitoring wells in Yarmouth at substantial cost to the airport. We already knew that our groundwater modeling showed that the airport's plume didn't go there. The airport spent substantial money to put it in, and when we tested it, it documented that we didn't have 6,2-fluorotelmer there. It documented that there's PFAS there from other sources, but not the airport. And again, the airport spent significant money to do that, to check a box for something we already knew wasn't going to be there. So again, we're doing this in steps to try to be as fiscally responsible as possible, but also help the public as much as we can. I think that's it. I think we need to roll out of here. But
Can I just ask one more thing? I was wondering, why are you here alone this year? I thought last year's meeting was much more productive, much more informative. You sat here with the county and with Dr. Shader from Silent Spring, and it provided a wraparound of this very complex site, and it addressed some of the health questions you've had. Are you not going to go back to that format? Did you choose to go it alone from now on?
We chose to go it alone to give you guys a chance to focus on the airport and to ask the questions. And I wanted the presentation to be short, to present to you guys what's there, but really to give you guys an opportunity to ask us questions. If we do it as a joint meeting, it tends to, you're overloaded with information. It's still a 2-hour meeting, and you don't have time to focus on the airport. I completely get with what you're saying, and the airport probably will do something like that again, a joint meeting. But this one was specifically done just to focus on the airport, to present our data, to take questions from people, answer any questions that you have. And then we plan to do this again probably in another 8 months or so once we have the risk assessment data done and the groundwater data done. Not to say that we won't do something joint again, but you know, we wanted to give everybody an opportunity to ask their questions.
Okay, and our time has expired, so thank you all for your engagement and your questions, and happy, healthy year.
Thank you.